over the last like couple of weeks, I've been seeing a lot of people do videos where they're talking about books that they anticipate or like reading goals for this year, and I don't really want to do that. I don't really anticipate anything. Like, I just sort of take on board other people's like opinions and then put things on my TBR, and then I'll buy them or like get the book later. I don't really kind of go into a year knowing that I want something unless it's a sequel of a book that I've already read. So I'm not like somebody who makes lists and looks out for books like that. I'm just like, if someone says it's good and then I see a couple good reviews by like different people that I really trust, then I'm gonna, you know, put it on the TBR and see whether I'll get round to it. Like, I don't really make lists for things. And number two, I made a winter like TBR, like what I want to read this winter video, and I'm not gonna lie, I did not really stick to it. I stuck to it like kind of, but I realized I find it really restricting, because what if I want to read a book that I was like, I'm gonna read this in February, but I'm like, I want to read it now, or I want to kind of like swap out some books. Like, I wanted to read poetry in December, but I realized by the end or like the mid-end of December that yes, I did want to read poetry, but I didn't really want to read the collection that I'd said that I wanted to. So I find that really restrictive. However, something that I have found really interesting to do this year, or like over the New Year's resolution period, has been ins and outs. Like, it was big, it was all over my like Instagram stories, and I made one for myself and I read loads of people's, but I made one for like book things that I think should be in and out for books. I made my own real ones. I'll put that one here, like this is my life one. And some of the ones that I have for like my life ins and outs are also part of my bookish ins and outs. But this for me works a little bit better than like a goal, or this, I want to definitely read this specific book, just because I don't work like that. And if I restrict myself like that, I will just go into a reading slump instead of picking something else up and just going on. However, made like a goal of like 50 books this year, because I've been incrementally increasing it by 5 books. So I read 100 books last year, but that was like a fluke. I was unemployed for a lot of last year. So that was a big reason as to why I read so much. It was just because it was like my gap year after university, rather than because, you know, I just read a lot of books. Like, usually I read around 30, 35 books. Sometimes I only just meet my Goodreads goal. Sometimes I exceed it by like 5 books. And I've only really met it since I started uni. So I think like the first year I met it was like 2019, where I think it was sort of like 20 books. And then every year since I've sort of been increasing it. So next year it's gonna be 50 books. So my goal last year was 45, I read 100, but that again, fluked. But this year I am employed. If you've been watching any of my videos, you'll know that I've been searching for a job for ages, and I finally got one. So this year, probably less time to read, so I've put it back to 50 books. I think I'm like just in a better place to be able to read 50 books, just generally, just because I've been prioritizing reading and sort of basing it around other things I want to do, because like usually I find it really hard to be like, I'm definitely going to read instead of watch TV or watch a movie. Now I'm like, okay, I want to do this much reading, this much TV, this much of like watching films, because I found like those are my big mediums that I really like. Like, I don't really care about music as much or like podcasts as much. Those are my big 3. But I do find it hard to sort of balance how much of each I'm doing. So usually I do way more TV. I still do way more TV. I think TV is definitely the one that I do the most of. However, I'm gonna try and do a bit more spread out levels of media consumption, I guess. But yeah, my ins and outs are like not concrete. They are sort of like one in to one out, and they kind of go in pairs. So the first one is DNFing. So I think DNFing is in. I found myself within DNFing last year just because I read a lot of books that I didn't really like, and especially when it came to some of the longer books I read, I was like, I want to not be reading this right now. Like, I really want to put this down. I don't have any inclination towards DNFing. It's not something I particularly like, so I will power through. I'm like, okay, I've made it so far into this, I'm just gonna finish. And I did that a couple times last year, and I just think, no more. Like, if I don't like it, if I'm 200 pages into a 700 page book, we are putting that down if I don't like it, because that is a lot more of a commitment, right? We're gonna end that. We're gonna read books that we actually like, because when I got to the end of the year, I was like, I read a lot of books, and there were a lot of books I didn't really care about, so I don't want to do that. I want to actually read books that I really care about and actually want to finish and read. Also, I don't really buy a lot of my books, so it helps in that regard, because, you know, Libby, piracy, just being gifted books, just being able to use some of my friends' books, it's easier just to be like, no, I don't want to read this right now. My computer is here, that's why I keep looking at that. But anyway, out, however, is YA. So one of the YA books that helped me realize I like want to start DNFing was Our Violent Delights. Their Violent Delights? The Romeo and Juliet gangster retelling from Chloe Gong. I really didn't like that book. And that was one of the books where I was like, I need to stop reading YA. And I think that was, it was a good stop. Okay, I have about maybe 10, 15 books on my TBR. 15 might be high, I think maybe it's like 10, 12 books on my TBR that are still YA. And I've sort of really cleansed a lot of my TBR that was from sort of when I was 17, putting books on my Goodreads TBR, and that's great, good for me, but I realized a lot of those aren't really what I like now. So I've kept about 12. I think I will still like those 12, so I've kept them in. I might take them off still, but right now I've kept some. I've got written loads. Like there's a lot of sort of YA fantasy, YA sci-fi that I had on there that I've realized I don't think I'm going to jive with them even if I pick them up, because I think the characterization for me recently with YA, not that great. I think YA is just sort of declining because of the way they write it. I think the way in which the characters aren't given like actual teenage proclivities. Like they're just always far too old for their age, or they just do weird shit and I don't like it and I don't like reading the medium, and clearly I've aged out of it, so I can't not look at the flaws either because I don't relate to the characters either. So we got rid of it, Reading what I want. So this kind of goes into like not having goals. So I don't want to set a TBR. I don't want to have like, I'm going to read these books in February because I'm just so much more of a mood reader. And even if like the things I've picked up are what I want, sometimes I'm like, okay, this week I should read this kind of book. No, like sometimes even just when it's sort of, okay, it's Halloween, I should be reading Halloween books. And I really try to like power through. Like I tried to read Cemetery Boys during October and I just didn't want to. And I feel like I shouldn't set myself those types of goals because I don't like doing that. I really just am put off by goals rather than actually feeling like I need to achieve it, or like I need to soak up the feeling of reading something in the time that it's meant to be. Like I really had a goal of like reading like romance novels during February because obviously Valentine's Day, and I'm just like, but do I want to? No, so let's just not do that. Let's read what I want right now. I think another thing in sort of like reading what I want, something I've realized is that I actually really don't like dark academia as a genre. I really like dark academia as a concept, I just don't really like it as a genre. I got into dark academia sort of right before it went mainstream, so I kind of remember it being a little bit more fringe, a bit more of a subculture-ish vibe, that it was like this big thing that everyone understood and knew about. So I wanted to go back to that, because right now it's a genre, it's something that publishers use to sell books, it's meant to be about being in an academic setting, it's about stories, about kind of like academic corruption. But I don't think those stories are particularly well done, especially since a lot of this sort of like academic corruption is like very insular. There's no sort of systemic conversations. I don't think that the dark academia label and the genre is interesting. I think when people try to explain what dark academia as a genre is, they kind of like veer off into this idea of like, we're looking at academia and we're looking at how it's deconstructed and how it oppresses people. And then you read the book they're talking about and it does none of that. I think we need to go back to it just being a bit of a vibe, okay? Because before it was just about reading things that were classic texts or things that made you feel like you really liked reading, or more than that, really liked studying. Right? It was about learning. I used it in a time where I was having a really hard time at university, and it was something that really made me like what I was learning, right? I had an English degree, so it's easier to sort of romanticize that, especially because there's so much other romanticization of English on the internet, like on Tumblr and stuff. And a lot of dark academia is deemed very white, but as a South Asian person who was on Tumblr in dark academia circles, you know, yeah, obviously there's a big part of it that's like red brick universities and Georgian architecture. But if you take those things and you put it in a big gift set of South Asian architecture alongside like Arabic poetry and Hindi poetry and Tamil poetry, you can romanticize this idea within what is relatable to you also. I think that's how I dislike dark academia, because a big part of it was sort of cultivating your own space within that subculture, and that doesn't really exist anymore because dark academia is more of a genre. It's about reading books that are set within an academic setting rather than sort of just liking the vibe. It was like more about reading like Dickinson or reading, you know, Dorian Gray and understanding Oscar Wilde's poetry and dissecting different motifs around them. It's about the idea of the romantic poets. And, you know, of course, a lot of that is white. I will agree with that. However, you can make it your own if you read what you want. And it's more about romanticizing learning and studying, especially since one of my other ins is about like learning and studying. I want that to come back to what dark academia is. Those subcultures still exist, but I do think like a lot of the tags and the places that you went to find it are much more like bombarded with the genre, with things like A Study in Drowning or An Education in Malice or, you know, all of those sort of dark academia books rather than what actually dark academia is. Like dark academia used to be about like the harshness of academia, and it's just not about that anymore. Like Normal People is about dark academia, right? It's about like being depressed and class discussion when it comes to academia, which is a big part of Connell's like life. But you wouldn't consider dark academia to be what happens to Connell, but it is. That is what it is. It's about talking about class. It's like The Secret History is a lot about class and murder and talking about all of those things intersectionally. It's not actually about their Greek class that much. It's just that they meet at the Greek class. It's not about the Greek. So I think those things are much more interesting when it comes to dark academia than what it's become. And I think right now it's a really watered down version of that, and it's more about sort of romanticizing university or like schooling rather than what it used to be, because I think a lot of it is just, you know, using it as a fun escapist thing of how to romanticize university rather than romanticizing learning, which I think is very different to just university. Like learning in university, you don't actually have to do both at the same time, even though that seems like a paradoxical thing to say. I still believe that they are not the same. I don't know if that made sense, but like I just don't like the state of dark academia right now, which is such a weird thing to say considering it's just like this stupid subculture. But yeah, I just don't like the way that no one talks about any oppression or culture or understanding politics or any sort of philosophical learnings. Like no one's doing Derrida, no one's doing Diderot, no one's doing Marx, you know, no one is doing Foucault, no one is doing Fanon, like no one is doing Touré, no one is reading like the Panthers. That's not what dark academia is about anymore. It's not about learning, it's about the vibe of learning, and it's like, that's not the fucking same, is it? Okay, so my next in is South Asian literature. So I am South Asian. I have a lot of stuff on my TBR that is like South Asian literature. A lot of the really classic stuff like Brick Lane or Midnight's Children, but also just like other stuff like romances about South Asian people, just like some non-fiction about not South Asian people. But I've been wanting to like make a video on South Asian literature, and I just don't think I'm ever gonna make that. I don't know if I actually care about making that video anymore. So I think I'm just gonna, instead of sort of putting it off, okay, I'll do it when I have like a whole ton of books that I'm gonna read and talk about all together. I'm just gonna read them. I'm just gonna read them when I want to, so I can read something that I can really relate to. It's nice. I read The Namesake and The Many Deaths of Lila Starr, and those are both about South Asian protagonists, and those are really cool. So I think I just want to feel that again instead of just putting it off for another time. Talking about that, something that's out for me this year is mashed potato books. I listened to a podcast called Books Unbound. It's hosted by Ariel Bassett, who is a YouTuber, and her friend Raylene. She was also a YouTuber, she's not anymore. She was an OG YouTuber, actually. They call books that they've been putting off for a very long time mashed potato books. Things that have been on their TBRs for like a very long time, but they've just like not gotten around to because they think they're gonna really like it. So you wanna be like in your right headspace to read that book. And so you put it off because you think it's gonna be really good, and then you just like never read it, or it kind of falls out of fashion for you and the world, and none of the discourse is there anymore. So I don't want to do that. I want to read books when I want to, and I want to read books that I really like. Like instead of being like, I think I'm gonna really like this, I want to wait till I'm in the headspace to do this. I'm just gonna be like, I kind of feel like doing this right now, so I'm going to take it on board and just read it immediately, because again, I really want to read books that I actually like. That is something that I am weirdly struggling with, which is so stupid because it's like, of course you want to read things that you like, but I'm just not doing that for some reason. So again, reading books that I think I'm really gonna like. So one of the big ones for me is Happy Hour. I will get around to talking more about this for one of my other ins, but like I've been putting this off because I think I'm gonna really like it, but why am I not reading it? Like there's nothing actually putting me off from this. Just pick it up and read. My next in is poetry. Again, like as I said at the beginning of the video, I've been wanting to read some poetry collections. I just like haven't really been going and getting around to it. I want to read Mary Oliver's Poetry Handbook. I was meant to read that in like December according to my winter TBR video, but again, never did that. I want to read poetry and actually understand poetry. And I think I'm gonna start really small, like with poetry that I already think I'll understand, because I went way into the deep end with Ocean Form and I don't think I understood any of it. I want to start small, people that I've already read, maybe like Caroline Duffy, maybe some Wendy Cope, and really like build up from there. Maybe go to some poetry like readings around London, really like get into the space and the vibe for poetry so that I can understand poetry a bit more, because I find it really hard if the poetry is a little bit too rich. Like I find it too hard to understand. Like I'm not particularly smart when it comes to unfolding and understanding poetry. I'm not the greatest. I do have an English degree and sometimes I feel ashamed that I don't know how to do that, but it's okay. Like it's hard and I will get to it. But I'm gonna start from like a small foundation. Like I didn't do any poetry modules because I thought that I was too stupid to do poetry, but I wanna actually get it. I want to understand poetry. So that will be a big thing for me this year. I want to read some collections. And my next out is bad romantasy. Okay, this is a specific swing at like Jennifer L. Almond-Trout and the Fourth Wing series. Just enough with the bad romantasy, okay? I massively don't understand it. I can't lie, like I get it. Like I really like fantasy and I really like romances in my fantasy. And so I understand the appeal, but they're quite bad and I don't want to get burned by them. Like I don't want to go into them and like find them really bad, and I feel like I would not like them. Like I don't think that they would have the right level of like adult to them, because a big part of it is like the focus on the romance and then less sort of world building. And I don't think I would want that, especially if the characters aren't very interesting or the romance isn't very well developed. If it's not good, I think I'm gonna find the fact that the world isn't as, you know, interesting or intricate really annoying. So I just don't want it anymore. Enough with the romantasy, please. Enough romantasy, more fantasy, less romantasy. But then I'm also like, I perhaps just am not the audience, but I'm also like, but I am the audience. So I find a weird dissonance of like definitely being the audience for fantasy, but also like I hate the concept. I just want the romance to be like in the fantasy. Like I don't want them to be like super separate. Like I don't mind the fantasy just having a good romance in it. But I also understand that some people just don't give a shit about the fantasy element and like all the world building that goes into it. But I don't care. I don't want it anymore. I hope it becomes like a fringe thing. It's not that I don't want it to exist. I just want it to be like away. Enough. Then maybe let's talk about some other stuff. And then my next in is happier books. I will get there. Okay, so this is where I'm going to talk about happy hour. There are some books that I have on my TBR that are meant to be like quite happy. They're about upbeat. They're about women doing well. You know, there's such a big emphasis these days on sad women, mad women, women that are going through a lot. Enough. Mentally sound women, please. Like women having a hard time because of capitalism, women that are having a hard time because their family are nuts, instead of like, this woman is going through a lot because she doesn't know what she's doing in life and she's so adrift. Enough. Like, I don't want it to be a romance. That's another thing. I'm like, just like contemporary lit fic about people that are doing okay. Right? And I understand everyone's like, well, there should be conflict. I don't know, like find conflict. Okay? I want happier books about people doing okay. You know, people who are finding it hard because of other reasons than like mental illness. And talking about that, something that's out is just stories about mentally ill. For me, like not for everyone, for me, just enough. Like I've had enough of like the sad, contemplative fiction about people who are like mentally going through a lot. I'm actually okay up there and I'm gonna be employed. So 2 double wins for me. I want more stories about people who are having a hard time because of like other things. Talk about how feminism is affecting them and how it's harder to work in a corporate environment when you're brown, or how it's harder to work in a corporate environment if you're really girly, or it's harder to work in a corporate environment if you're shy, instead of all this shit where it's like, I don't know how I'm gonna make it through the day. It's so sad. My mom died 5 months ago and this heavy burden is weighing on me. Enough heavy burdens, light burdens, vibes, friendships, hard friendships, stories about friends who have moved away and therefore your best friend has left you alone across the world and you're sad about that. Where are the stories about these normal ass problems, okay? I can't be reading fan fiction for all of it. It's getting lame, okay? I want fiction about things going well, okay? Enough sad shit. Happy stuff, please. No romances, happy stuff. Just like vibes, just like hanging out with your friends getting brunch, but like something bad happens, but it's more like, oh my God, my credit card declined. Damn it, I didn't make my credit card payment. That sucks, my credit score is going down. And you're like, that's not that interesting, but it can be. It can be though, okay? I am a Sally Rooney enjoyer, so you understand the type of person I am. So make these happy things happen, please. I want happy recommendations. If anyone's watching this and they understand the vibe that I'm trying to put down right now, happy recommendations, please and thank you. Okay, I have a couple, I'll put them on screen where I'm like, this probably has like that upbeat vibe that I'm looking for. I want more of that, please, 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 please. I've had enough with sadness. So my next in, now that stories about the mentally ill are out, are thrillers. I think thrillers and the next one that's my pairing, which is something that I want out, for me personally, again, for me personally, not for everyone. I want to make that so clear. These ins and outs are mine, except the romantasy one. I feel like that one, I kind of want to see a shift in the paradigm of like the bookish community. However, this is for me. And that is, I want rom-coms out. I don't really like them anymore. I don't find them that interesting. I don't think the stories about how much they're in love make sense. I don't think a lot of them would stay in relationships. I want more stories about love. We'll get to that. But thrillers, right? Like thrillers, I want that to be the thing that I take over for rom-coms. Rom-coms usually, for a lot of people, including myself, can be a palate cleanser. It can be something that's quite quick, quite jumpy, quite pacey, and it's easy to read with a lot of like sort of fun characters that go here and there, and it's like really fast, right? That's what I think of when it comes to rom-coms and like why I like reading them so much. It's because they're quite fast. You read them because you want to know what happens. You want to see them get together. And you know that's going to happen, right? Thrillers, again, are a genre, and therefore there's like genre conventions, and it can be fast, it can be pacey, you want to know what's happening because, you know, it's like a mystery, but there's like a lot of like high stakes going on. So instead of picking up a rom-com, sort of do a palate cleanse, do a really fast pacey read, I want to pick up a thriller instead. I have a fair few thrillers on my TBR that I just don't ever pick up. I don't really pick up thrillers because I'm not like drawn to them, but I find their like synopsis quite interesting. That's why they're on the TBR in the first place and they've never been taken off. But I want to commit to actually being like, ooh, okay, I've read this really long fantasy book, or I've read this really long, you know, contemporary literature book. To palate cleanse this sort of emotional state that I'm currently in, I'm going to read a really pacey, quick, fun book like a thriller. And I don't want to read rom-coms that much anymore. I find rom-coms to be way better suited to the film medium. I think they're way better just because acting really brings charm that I don't think is in rom-coms. I think music is so helpful to rom-coms. Direction is so helpful to rom-coms. Like, I don't think a lot of rom-coms are actually that funny, and I think a big part of that is you can see a joke written out and, you know, you can do the joke in your head and it can be funny, but the physicality of the acting that someone can do on screen to really bring that joke to life is such a big part of why rom-coms are better on screen to me. Like, I like feeling the warmth of a joke or the warmth of, you know, chemistry than being able to read it. I don't think it kind of brings that like fizz of electricity when you have a romance happening in front of you that I get when I watch even like a bad rom-com. So that's why rom-coms are out for myself and thrillers are in. However, I will be reading the new Emily Henry. That's the one that I'm actually kind of interested in. I didn't read last year's Emily Henry. She really churns these books out, wow. Because I don't read Happy Place, and then I don't know what the next one's called. Happy Together? Something. It's got a blue cover and it looks decent, I guess. And I like her writing generally, so I will be trying that out. Apart from that, I'm gonna have to give up on some of the rom-coms. And then my next in is reading short classics. I have quite a few classics, but I just don't pick up because I'm like, oh, classics, you know, they need so much sort of attention. I can't easily get through a classic, especially if it's kind of hard or it's got a bit more wordy language, just because I need to be like super focused. I can't listen to an audiobook. I need to be like, you know, flipping those pages, understanding that. That is not a book that I personally can read on like a commute. I need to be like in the zone reading a classic. And I've got quite a few that are just quite short. They don't need that much attention, you know, they won't take off like a whole month. They're just gonna take up like a week, maybe a couple days, especially if they're good. So I'm gonna try and tackle some of these short ones. Like I've got Giovanni's Room, I've got Picture of Dorian Gray, I've got Carmilla. So I'm just gonna try and read those instead because I feel like they can be really good. Like classics, you know, sometimes you read a classic and you're like, that's a classic for a reason. Like that shit bangs. So I do want to actually read them because clearly they are renowned throughout history for a very good reason. I just want to actually get round to being like, yeah, I definitely want to read that and not spend too much time committed to it. There's a fair few that I want to get through and I think this year might be the one for it. My next out, this was a bit random, is romance covers, okay? Yeah, romance is like catching many strays, but like I don't like the sort of kind of odd, faceless goop covers that they have. Like I'll put like examples of what I'm talking about. Like, I don't like them. They feel so impersonal. Like, of course I'm not talking about bringing back the sort of shirtless guy swaying, his hair's like in the air and like he's like ripped and chiseled, and I don't want to bring that back. I've seen some people be like, oh, so you're embarrassed to read romance? No, if you're a real romance reader, you would be out there reading the shirtless ripped guys on the front cover books. And I'm like, shut up, no. I just feel like they are so lifeless and they don't bring anything. And I know you're not meant to judge a book by its cover, but like, that's just stupid. Everyone judges a book by its cover, and I want romance covers to be better. I don't want them to be so samey. I know it's because it's a publishing thing and they're like, well, this sold, so if we do it again for this thing, it will sell as well. I get it. But they're ugly. They're ugly and soulless and I don't want them anymore. Get them out of here. Especially since like sometimes you get a romance cover that's really nice. And I'm like, well, why did this one get budget and then none of the others did? Like, I guess sometimes it must be that some authors just sell for name and therefore they can do a bit more experimentation, but it's annoying. It's actually getting annoying getting into like the romance section of a bookshop and it's just like the fucking same. Ugly. Ugly, ugly, ugly. My next in is physical books. I know this is really odd, but I read a lot on my phone. My phone is like a big part of my reading. I know that's really weird. People are much more like Kindle or e-readers rather than their phone. I like having my book with me anywhere. I like to be able to read on the train. I like to be reading just in a queue. I like to be reading at home on my bed. I want to be reading anywhere that I can just because I want to be able to get my quick fix of reading. I don't want to be waiting and like on Twitter. I want to be reading. So sometimes I just read on my phone. I don't know if I want to do that. I want to kind of bring into my routine like reading before bed. I am a big sort of chronic being online person right before going to sleep and I don't think that's helping. I spend a lot of time just sort of doing nothing in bed before I go to sleep, and especially since I'm starting a job soon, I don't want that to be a problem. Like I don't want to not be able to wake up the next day because I spent the whole night wasting away on my phone and I'm like, that doesn't feel very nice. I don't want to do that. So reading before bed, but I think a big thing with that is just I don't want anything that can access the internet with me. I don't want to be reading on my phone. I want the actual book. I want to put it to the side and then fall asleep. Like I think that is something that I'm going to be able to do. You know, as a child, you know, obviously that was harder, being like, oh, I don't want to put the book down, I'm going to spend the whole night reading. Like, I have a bit more self-control now that I am an adult. And as an inverse, something that I'm going to say is out is audiobooks for me, and also sort of in a small in note-taking. I want to be a bit less passive when I read. I think audiobooks are something that I've been relying on as like a crutch to read more, and I think I've been reading less actively. Like, obviously when you're reading a book and you're not listening to it, like you're the one reading. Like reading is a very active process, whereas like listening is a bit more passive. And you know, I do read while I'm like doing chores or cleaning or anything like that, and that's nice and it's always lovely to have that on hand. But sometimes I'm just like, I want to like underline things that I think are really good, and sometimes you just can't do that because you're listening to it. Especially if you're listening to it while you're doing something, you can't stop and then be like, okay, let me go find my physical copy. Or sometimes you don't have a physical copy and it gets really annoying. I just want to not have to bother with any of that and instead just read, especially because I want to note take more. I want to be able to do reviews. I think that is something that I want to do on this channel, and just for myself, because I want to get better at reviewing. I think a lot of reviews recently are just like not very good. They're very short. They're about what the book is about and less reviewing and less about contextual factors and why you think an author has done such a thing, or just like saying what you don't like about it instead of saying what you think they should have done. It's like what is not good about this book? Why is that not good? What was good about this book? How have the good things and the bad things melded together to make a decent book or a mediocre book? I want to be way better at actually explaining why a book is good or why it isn't good, or like who I think it perhaps could be for if it wasn't for me personally. Seeing like a book as something less personal but as a product of art. And I think a big part of that is going to be note-taking for me. And so I want to do less audiobooking and a bit more active reading, flipping pages, you know, that I want to be in that mindset a bit more. My next end, going back to sort of the dark academia stuff, is I want to read a bit more political theory. I've read, you know, a general amount. I am a bit more left-leaning. I like reading leftist texts, and I find it really hard to be like, okay, I definitely want to read this one, or I don't know what to read. And I'm gonna go through authors. I think I'm gonna make a list of like, okay, I really like this author, I've read some things by them before, and I'm gonna read more. There's this one bloody book of political theory about abolition that I've been putting off for so long. I talk about it like a million times over the last like 4 months that I've owned this book, and I've not read it. I'm going to get around to it. I'm gonna read that book. It's by Angela Davis and Gina Dent and a few other people. And it's about abolition and feminism, and I'm gonna read that. And I think I'm gonna read some Fanon. I think I'm gonna read some Marx, just some, like, I wanna read The Shock Doctrine. I wanna read several, like, political books and take notes on them. Again, that's a big reason why I wanna, like, focus on note-taking as well. I want to really take in the messages and the ideas, the ideologies that these books give off, and take them in so I can understand them and just sort of have a bit more to say. Like, I feel like, you know, I am a leftist and that's something that I talk about and that's something that I believe in, but I don't really have exactly the facts and the figures and the ideas to hand to talk about it. So I feel like I don't talk about my politics as much because I'm like, I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to be well worded and understanding about others and give a really good coherent response to other people about what I believe. So I want to read more to really understand that. I've also been watching this TikTok creator called Ismatu, and she really talks about the power of reading. Like, watching a video is really great, but reading can be way more active because, well, you know, when you're watching something, they're doing it. Right? Like, they're the ones telling you, they're the ones who know, right? Like, I had to rewatch a couple of Philosophy Tube's videos. Like, her videos are great, right? But I was like, okay, but why do we actually hate Jordan Peterson? Okay, he's a misogynist, he's a racist, but like, what did he do? And I was like, I can't tell you an example. And I was like, but I watched that video and I know he's a dick and I've seen him be a dick on Twitter, but I don't have any examples to hand. And I like rewatched her video and I was like, okay, yeah, like I get it. Like, I get why Jordan Peterson is a bad person, but I'm like, I really watch those videos. I take the message away and I understand, but I'm also like, I'm not remembering shit. And that's what's necessary to remember stuff. So as Ismatu said, I want to read more and take in and understand and be a bit more like in the vibe. And I want to also take that on to my real life, which is like going to more social events that are within spaces that I think are about people who want to make change, do more mutual aid stuff. And I think reading will kind of lead me there. The more I read and really feel invigorated about that idea, I will be more taken to being in a physical space with people who also believe what I believe. And in that vein, something I want out is Goodreads. I love Goodreads, I can't lie. Everyone's like, it's so shit, like they hate it, and I don't. I really like Goodreads. I love the way that I shelve things on Goodreads. Everything about Goodreads makes sense to me. I have friends on there. I have years worth of history on there. You know, my Goodreads challenge means so much to me. That's so lame, but it does. And I don't want to move to Storygraph, especially since like I tried like 2 years ago and it moved all my stuff and it did it all wrong and I hated it and I didn't want to have to go through everything and like change stuff so that it would work. I was like, just fucking work on your own. It was back when like Storygraph was like kind of moving out of beta and it just wasn't working and I was like so infuriated by it, and I was like, I don't want to have to put in like 700 books by hand. That's long as shit and I don't care. You know what's been working for me? Goodreads. But Goodreads is owned by Amazon. Goodreads does look like shit and it doesn't really give you the breakdowns that I think Storygraph does. Like, Storygraph obviously gives you way more information and a lot of people are obviously moving to Storygraph, which I think is valid. I really respect that. Obviously Goodreads and its Amazon stuff pisses me off too, but I still use Amazon, so I feel like not using Goodreads because of the Amazon thing perhaps a little redundant. I think one of them is clearly worse, you know, actually using Amazon, especially since like I watch loads of shit on Prime like all the time, so you know, like, but I do want to be on Storygraph just to get like a bit more of the feeling of understanding the books I'm reading and seeing all the genres and seeing how other people have rated things. I think Storygraph might have a crop of people that are a bit more into reading rather than just like everyone in the general public who has read a book ever. And my next in is historical retellings. I've already read 2. They're both by Maggie O'Farrell. I read both Hamlet and The Marriage Portrait, and I really liked both of them. And I thought they were both great. And I think I really just enjoy historical retellings. Obviously, I've always really loved like Taylor Jenkins Reid. She has her whole like fake world of all these famous people, and that's not really a historical retelling, but it's like in history and it's about famous people. And Maggie O'Farrell kind of also does that, but just for like earlier. Like hers a bit more like 1500s-ish, whereas Taylor Jenkins Reid is much more like in the 90s. And those are still so cool, but I want to read more. So my next read is Lapfona. I've started it and I haven't really gotten that far, but again, another historical story. It doesn't have to be a retelling. The others are sort of retellings. The Marriage Portrait kind of is a retelling just because like it happened in real life and it's about a real person, and I guess it's like a version of their life. But historical fiction, just in general, is something that I am leaning towards being something that I really like. I think it's kind of a trend recently as well. Like I don't think it's just me. I think fiction itself is picking up on like historical fiction being in, like especially like historical contemporary fiction. Like I feel like historical fantasy has been really in, or like historical fiction that's mainly for men, I think is very in. Sort of like, oh, we're going to the World War and aren't we in Dunkirk, guys? Like that kind of historical fiction is really in. Whereas this is, you know, again, very women-centric and also a little bit more about like the emotions of being in that place and that time. It's also a little bit less like war-focused. I think a lot of historical fiction is war-focused or very romantic. I think those two are like the ways that they usually like split for historical fiction. It's like either we get like a war thing that's more like men, and then it's like romantic history, and then it's like women. Whereas like we haven't got that much recently, at least, where it's like historical lit fic. And I really like it. I think it's really fun. And more, like I'm gonna read more. I've got a couple already on my like to read. Some that are like from the 1800s, 1700s, the 2000s, the 1900s, like a lot of different spectrums of like time, and I just want to get into them. I think, you know, they can be lots of different genres, but there's a bit more lit fic that's set in the past, that but written now, if that makes sense. Like written now, but is historical fiction. It's not like fiction written at the time. I'm not talking about like reading Don Quixote or something. And then my last out is, I guess, a goal that is an in but an out, is not reading the book to movie adaptation before the movie. I haven't really cared about it since like school. Like I used to be a big person. Like I used to be the person that had always read the book before I watched the movie. Like I would be like telling people what happened in the book, like in the middle of the movie, like guys, in the movie they changed this and that. And I'm a bit more like, I want to read the book. A big one for me right now is Dune. I've never read Dune, and I feel like Dune is a bit of a meaty, very classic sci-fi story. You know, it's in the canon of sci-fi, and I've not read it. And I liked the movie. I really liked the movie, so I think I will give it a try. Obviously, people don't like it. People think it's really dense, but I have read a lot of science fiction. However, I will say most of the science fiction I have read is YA. So I feel like if it is really complicated, I think I too will find it complicated. So I am a little bit like, oh, I don't know. Maybe this isn't something that I'm gonna love, but I'm gonna try it anyway. I think it's gonna be something that's a good opportunity for me to try and see how much I actually like adult fantasy and science fiction, because I haven't had the best deal with it recently, but I've got a few that are like standalones that I'm going to pick up and read. They're only like 400 pages, so we'll see. And I'm gonna start with Dune because it's a book to movie adaptation. Dune is coming out soon. I don't know if I'll read it before the movie is out, but I think I'll have a good time reading it, in my opinion. Some of the other ones are like Poor Things is a book. I didn't care about reading that. I didn't really care about reading Challenges. I don't think I will before it comes out either. Bones and All was this book. Didn't really care about reading that. Like I don't really care about it anymore, but I do think I'm going to start caring a little bit more, especially if it's something I think I'm gonna really like. I might just pick up the book and read it before the movie comes out, just so that I get a full scope of what's happening. Let's see what changes. I like seeing that, especially since I'm somebody who has both an English and film degree. I studied both of them, and like I understand both of the mediums decently well. So I like seeing the differences between them And I think that's why I have that specific opinion about rom-coms, just because I've really studied both of them. And I'm like, this one has much more of an elevated idea of the genre than this one does. And I think I want to see that for different kinds of books, because I don't really read a lot of different genres before they went to screen. Like, a lot of it was sort of like dystopians or like romance, especially since like one of the main ones I have read was Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I actually haven't seen that movie because I don't really like the way that they've adapted it. A lot of people have talked about it already, but I think some of the stuff that they changed is very annoying. And I think being able to have those conversations, being able to be like, I read this book and then I watched the movie and I don't really like the changes they made because this, that, and the other is different, and therefore the messaging is different. You can see by the changes, the way in which the industries are different. Those are very interesting and good conversations to have about art. And I want to be part of having those conversations because I think they tell us something about society. And so I want to give it a try. Not all book to movie adaptations, but some of them. Some of them I think I need to give a little bit more of a try for, especially since I used to be so obsessed with it when I was like 14, 15, and I just don't care about reading the book anymore, especially if I don't want to read it. Obviously, you know, reading what I want is very important. It was a big thing for me with the ins, but this is also something that I want to try, you know, especially with Dune. We'll stick with Dune and we'll see where we go with Dune and see if that sets a precedent for being like, I want to read what I want, but I also want to read so that I can have good, nuanced opinions on things. But yeah, those are all of my ins and my outs for 2024. And I hope some of them happen. I hope I take my words into consideration. You know, these are my words that I've put down for me to do, especially since, like, you know, they're not goals. You know, I don't need to do any of these things, okay? Even if I read like one book to kind of like associate with all of these, that's enough. Hopefully this made sense. And tell me some of your ins and outs for the year, because they are really fun. Like, I loved watching everyone's like Instagram stories and like seeing what people had to say, especially if they're like bookish ones. If you have any like goals that are like your ins or any outs that are your goals, they can be really fun to read, because I, at the end of the day, I'm very nosy. But yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day, and maybe like if you liked the video, or, you know, cheeky subscribe if you really rocked with my opinions. But yeah, thank you again for watching.